Good morning. It is my privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Rollin Ramsaran, Professor of New Testament and Early Christian Origins, on the occasion of this event, his so-called last lecture. As you can see from the back of your program, there is much that can and should be said about Dr. Ramsaran. But in this brief introduction, I would like to focus on his character. There is perhaps no higher praise and respect granted an educator than that he or she consistently models in everyday life what they teach. And it certainly takes more than one witness to make this case for Dr. Ramsaran. And so, Rollin, I asked your colleagues and some former students to put into words what you have meant to them and this seminary to which you have devoted so much of your life. Now, if I were to read aloud all the carefully articulated and heartfelt expressions of gratitude that were forwarded to me, I fear there would be precious little time remaining for your address. At one point, I considered projecting on the large screens here a giant word cloud of all the words that kept coming up repeatedly, words such as integrity, courage, wisdom, generosity, devotion, kindness, patience, and passion. But those words by themselves don't capture the unbounded gratitude your colleagues and former students have for you. So let me offer a few excerpts that bear witness to the impact you have made on so many lives. A former student writes, quote, "Dr. Ramsaran is known for being a passionate and inspiring professor, memorably jumping onto desks and performing scripture. We used to beg Dr. Ramsaran to teach more courses because learning NTI from him wasn't enough to glean from all his wisdom," end quote. More than one colleague noted how vital your voice in practice has been in underscoring the central role of formation. One of them put it this way, quote, "Both as a dean and a faculty member, the primary question that Rollin brings to the seminary programs and courses is this: how are we helping students be formed as disciples of Jesus and ministers of the gospel? He has never allowed us to be satisfied with merely putting together a coherent course that covers the subject matter, or a degree program that is justifiable to our accreditors. He has always seen what we do as a seminary in light of that bigger question. In doing so, Rollin has been a shaper of culture for this school, and that culture will be his greatest legacy." Another common theme from your colleagues, Rollin, is the gratitude they express for your steadfast leadership through a number of challenges, not least the merger with Milligan and a worldwide pandemic. One wrote, quote, "Rollin guided Emmanuel through times of transition and challenges with utmost integrity and dedication," while another said, "With uncommon faithfulness, Rollin set the course for our seminary, pastoring our community and leading with extraordinary clarity and courage," end quote. Scholar, teacher, administrator, pastor. It's tempting to say that's a lot of hats for any one person to juggle, and that would be true. But at his best, I believe Rollin didn't wear one hat at a time. I believe he just had one hat, where these various vocations beautifully informed the others. One colleague said it well, quote, "It is a rare thing to find in one person the mind of a scholar, the steady hand of an administrator, the heart of a pastor. But Rollin has been precisely that rare thing. We are richer for having served alongside him, and those he has taught are richer still," end quote. I imagine, Rollin, that 32 years ago, you didn't imagine that you would be called to devote so much of your time and energy to serving as the dean of this seminary. But you were called to do so, and your devotion to that call and this seminary came at no small cost, because it meant you were able to do less of what you loved most, which was to teach. I'm sure I'm not the only one here this morning who is grateful that you were able, during these last few years, to turn your focus to your love of teaching. So as all of us here today gather once more to be your students, let me close by quoting one more student. This one who listed several lines that have stayed with her over the years and informed her preaching. Here's what she remembers you saying to your students, quote, "It's not about being selfless. Christ isn't asking you to not have a self. It's about self-giving love. Give of your whole self. Claim your whole identity in Christ and give that self away," end quote. I hope it pleases you, Rollin, that students have been listening to you. And these particular words sounds to me like a preview of your address this morning. But what I believe is even more commendable are the ways you have modeled this sentiment for us over and over again. For over 30 years, you have beautifully and humbly claimed your whole identity in Christ and given your whole self away as an act of self-giving love. Thank you, and thanks be to God. Please welcome Dr. Rollin Ramsaran for his last lecture.
Well, thank you for those meaningful words. Thank you for bringing together a number of words on behalf of others. I'm very touched. I just want to express warm regards and great thankfulness for each one of you coming here to be here for this occasion. It truly does touch me. I'm going to leave it at that so I can keep my emotions under control. And do what it is that I was asked to do, or my interpretation of doing what I was asked to do, the success of which I will lead to your judgment. So, thanks to Gary Selby and the Chapel Committee for organizing and inviting me to this fine event. Thank you to Ellie Beth Potter for taking my class this morning so I could keep centered and have the energy I need at this particular moment. Standing here, I have fond thoughts of my first sermon during the hiring process in February 1994. Ancient history for some of you youngins. Over my career, there have been multiple opportunities to deliver a sermon here, In addition, for 10 years, I delivered the annual opening dean's address, giving vision to the seminary identity and effectiveness for 21st century theological education. But today, I think more about classroom and lecture, apparently my last in here. And even that brings back memories, since this, right here, was the lecture classroom for New Testament introduction during the COVID-19 transition. Okay, so some guidelines. In class, we call those housekeeping matters. This is a one-shot lecture. Let's think of it as a thought experiment rather than an academic paper. It may not be as interactive as I might want, but there isn't another class session to follow. I have chosen a rather large subject, and I'll have to jump in somewhere. So I plan to finish off my lecture career where it started, thinking together with seminary theological students. I don't know where that will leave us all as a larger group. Some of you may be looking in, as it were, on an ongoing conversation and ongoing formation. I will just ask your patience with that. This lecture has a theological bent to it. I have always thought of New Testament studies and its probing issues that way. Overall, I've tried to make things as easy as possible to follow along for everyone, and I may ask you to believe a few things as I move to and around the core subject. I hope we can learn together, you from me and me from you. Okay then, I am not alone. The believer's robust sense of self, according to Paul. 3 evident things I think we can agree upon. God creates in diversity. Just look around. This world is full of confusion. Just check your news feed. And then third, each person has a self. In so-called individualistic and collectivist societies, differentiated people act with agency to think, to reflect, and to act within some type of shared framework. Now, you may have different experiences, but for me, some, maybe many, including Christians, are deeply confused about the self. Some examples across a continuum. I can do it all by myself, for myself. I don't like myself. I need to greatly improve myself. I am not capable of doing what it is that I want. And then there are some of those expressions we use, especially among Christians, that are imprecise, if not confusing to me, but maybe not to you. I'm thinking of the words like selfless, self-sacrifice, lose oneself, getting the self out of the way, and so forth. So, I want to see what it might mean to be clear about the self, the person, the individual in community by engaging the Apostle Paul. The world at the time of the New Testament had no hint of the radical individualism that we find in Western European and North American societies in which we are familiar. But individualism was on the rise in the Hellenistic world of Jesus and Paul. The Apostle Paul, more than any other writer in the New Testament, speaks about, highlights, and engages the individual as individual. And I think we are richer for that. Paul is not individualistic by any means. He does not talk about the individual apart from the community. He goes out of his way to keep the concept of the individual, the self, the person, together and integrated with the concept of community. We need to study his balance on this topic. Now, in ministry context, we often reach for community. That's the answer. And I suppose that's not a bad impulse, given the framework and the structure, and I might add the destructive nature of the radical individualism under which we labor. But I do think we can overreach for community and possibly unintentionally and accidentally undervalue and underappreciate the place of the individual. Paul sees engagement of the individual for freedom, for instruction, for correction, and for inclusion as necessary for strong community. So I suggest our first step is to be open to the balanced and integrative framework as presented by Paul. I think Paul believed that the individual influenced the community, and the community influences the individual. He certainly doesn't seem to have an appreciation for the idea of a self-contained individual at work. The Hellenistic world had some leanings towards this. The Stoics and the skeptics come to mind. Among the powerful elite and oppressive Roman regime, the Stoic philosophy of self-mastery was very influential. Susan Eastman has challenged us to think about how a self is constructed before we tackle the many possible distortions on the continuum of an individual to group orientation. Most interesting is how we have come to see, through broad interdisciplinary studies, the development of a person or self in our own time. We tend to think we have come to construct ourself with autonomy from the inside out. But in reality, we only construct ourself in a process with another self or selves, what Eastman calls self in relationship to another, or second-person construction. Put simply, we are shaped by the company we keep from the get-go and ongoing. We do make choices about who we engage with and how much, and the type of connection we put in. But human beings don't stand back and put together an abstract and detached self-construction as we like. That is false, whether we believe it or not. We are shaped by the company we keep, or the company we are given over to, or the company that we choose. Let me say that again. We are shaped by the company we keep, or the company we are given over to, or the company that we choose. At any rate, Paul can speak of the interconnection of individual persons together in what he calls the body of Christ. In 1 Corinthians 12, using the stock image of the collective as a body with many members, Paul seeks to acknowledge difference among the members of the community with respect to place, roles, and comportment. Eyes, ears, hands, feet come to the fore, but he has all the body parts in mind. A foot says, since I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body. An ear says, because I'm not an eye, I am not a part of the body. Underachievers in the community. Self-talk, I can't, I'm not capable, I don't fit. These underachievers have not fully engaged the freedom, the power, and the knowledge present in the gospel. But wait, there's more. An eye says to the hand, I have no need of you. And the head says to the feet, I have no need of you. Overachievers. They have experienced freedom and power and knowledge, and they look down on and speak out against those who have not. Self-talk. I can do it all by myself, for myself. Now, Paul's strategy here may surprise us. Paul doesn't try to bring the overachievers down because the gospel and gifting is powerful. He tries to bring the underachievers up because the gospel is powerful and gifting. God, who arranges the body and sees its parts, it is the Spirit that enlivens gifts for all. But all knowledge and freedom and power must be mediated in love. There are many parts, yet one body, having the same care for one another, together and connected. Now, since this is a lecture in New Testament studies, let's explore for a moment our methodology in approaching the Apostle Paul. Then we can home in to the self. We must account for Paul's actions and how he uses words. This leads us to background studies about topics, worldviews, and the historical, social, political, economic, and religious relations that illuminate first century life. Such study has been done with rigor. But my concern in this little methodological breakout box is how we use that information. More specifically, how we apply or interpret the information specifically to Paul. Sometimes, but not always, the methodological logic runs like this. find a background concept, make a connection with Paul, and then fit Paul into the concept. My problem here is often the results of such a methodology don't seem to cohere with what I read in Paul's letters and or the larger framework out of which Paul thinks and operates. Paul sees a world and a world coming into being. God is at work in Jesus to reframe, to recreate, to renew, and to make new. My methodology, based on reading Paul, is background concept, establish a connection with Paul, then see how Paul accepts or rejects or recovers or reframes or renews key issues and concepts. For instance, Paul lived and breathed in the Greco-Roman culture of honor and shame. So, get as much honor as you can and use shame and pick fights that you can win so you can constantly increase your honor. But listen to Paul implicitly reject and reframe the honor and shame in this new world coming into being, this new world leading to God's good future. Romans 12:10. Outdo one another in the giving of honor. Not get, give. Paul flips it. So methodologically, don't expect Paul to allow the framework, standards, and values of this world to dictate how he speaks, acts, and instructs. Expect Paul to move against death-dealing and oppressive ways, and to challenge and to confront them. In Romans chapters 1 through 8, Paul spins a story about the self, selves, and the societies they create. If Stanley Stowers is correct, and I think he is in part, then Paul tells a story of civilizational decline, like other moralists of the time. A careful reading of Romans 1 indicates a strong imperial context of the late 50s CE. Think Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. So, a strong imperial Roman context of the late 50s CE, with some attention to the background of self-control in Kratia, and its opposite, lack of self-control, akrasia. With self-control molded in the shape of Roman expressions of Stoic self-mastery, namely unmovable, emotion-controlled, impenetrable, segregated oppressive power around the established place of strong, entitled men over other weak persons, and firm hierarchical placement. In that climate, Paul says there is a rejection of the God of creation and a looking to boast in objects or people to confirm one's own desires. I can do it for myself, all by myself. And this leaves others to bear up under a society of degradation, evil, and violence. Those others now left to cry out, I can't do it, or maybe to attach themselves to evil ways in hopes of doing a little something. Serving the creature rather than the creator, attending to fickle gods and various images, having no proper connection to nature itself, having no august imperial leaders to guide the way to human flourishing, seeking a self-mastery. A lack of self-control leads to utter confusion, corruption, and violence, and the ongoing perpetuation of evil by evil persons. And in the blowing winds of self-mastery at the time, the Jewish expressions of faith seem to be lacking and leading to the same ends: improper recognition of God, no sure guidance or consistency from leaders and teachers. You who teach others, do you steal? Do you rob temples? All this despite God's gracious revealing of Torah. Yes, corruption and violence also mark some within the very people of God. Now, in the midst of all of this, Paul remembers the promises of God, the story of Abraham and faithfulness, Jeremiah and a new covenant, written on the hearts, not on stone tablets, with new enlivening power, Ezekiel with hearts of stone now beating, a new spirit within. The people of God come back to life. A fresh initiative of God's grace breaks forth in the death and resurrection of Jesus. And as always, grace has the capacity to lead to faith, and faith leads to God's enlivening power, God's Spirit, for those marked and incorporated into the body of Christ by baptism. Right standing before God, peace with God, and gratitude and right worship. Now following in the way of Jesus, there can be right relationships with one another, self-giving love. Believing communities endure suffering and frailty with joy and hope as the Spirit leads us into God's good future. And Paul says, I can paint you a new world. A new world is coming into being. Orient yourself to the Spirit, and it will help and guide you into the good future of God. And nothing can separate us from the love of God. This is the new world. The new creation, the new human, where self-mastery can't get it done, spirit mastery can. Now, where is the self and selves and social structures in this new spirit mastery? Can we say the self comes alongside the spirit with both working together? Now, time permitting, we will turn to 4 texts or text clusters for a closer look. In looking to find the self in Paul, scholars oftentimes turn to Paul himself. Does Paul lose himself? Does Paul want to put his self aside for something else? If so, what? 2 key texts will guide us at the beginning. Moment of truth here. Yay. You know how you worry about giving addresses or sermons or stuff like that? I worried a little bit of this. I worried about the most. It's just like, okay. All right, the first one is everybody's memory verse, Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. This is a very interesting verse. We could say a lot, and I've written about it extensively in print. But my interest today is does Paul intend to lose his self and what? Get another? I think not. A self is a person with agency. That agency is not lost in the transformation from an unredeemed self to a redeemed self, which is what Paul means by being crucified with Christ. That is, everything that leads up and into baptism and beyond. The unredeemed self focuses inwardly and away from God. It is somewhat self-facing and directed. The redeemed self focuses toward God and outwardly. It is somewhat outward-facing and directed. Paul dies, but he doesn't. Christ lives in Paul, but Paul is still there. Many people have pointed out the fact that the me's and the I's just keep on going right through the verse itself. And again, students of Paul know that he overstates things at times. He overstates and then comes back to explain. So the NTIers are saying now, rhetorical correctio, right? There you go, okay. This is what is happening here. Crucified in baptism to newness of life, following Romans 6:4 for the moment, is followed by living differently. Closer to home, Galatians 6:14, the world has been crucified to me and I to the world. In the present time, outside worldly human standards and values, like self-mastery, just don't hold up for those in Christ. The only loss here is the loss of the orientation of the self, not the self itself. I practiced not saying that, and there I just boom, it just goes right there, okay? Didn't want to, yeah. All right, moving along. A self, Paul's self, is transformed through relationship, because that is how a self is brought into being, transformed, changed, and further formed, in relationship with another self or selves. And that is what is being described here. Faith responding to faithfulness and love, deeply embedded in the giving of another self for others. So Paul says, "And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." That is who Paul is now in relationship, oriented to the love of Jesus and oriented to giving himself to others, the robust self. Christ lives in me. Christ lives in me. Can we be more specific? I want to look at Romans 8, 9 through 11. I've adjusted the text. I was going to put both texts up and show you why I adjusted it, but found out that was going to take way too long and not enough screen. So here we are. And I will, mostly what I've done is made the pronouns explicit, and then the other parts I'll tell you as I move through. "But you are not in the flesh, you are in the Spirit. If in fact the Spirit of God dwells in you. If anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, this one does not belong to him. But if Christ dwells in you, although your body is dead because of sin, your spirit is alive because of righteousness. If the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, God who raised Jesus from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies, also through God, Jesus' Spirit, which dwells in you." Okay, so let's start with Christ in you. There is no verb, so we have to supply one. Is okay, that is the verb to be. But the shape of this whole section is that something dwells in a person or a self. So I've left it up as is or dwells in the middle there with Christ. The section is shaped theologically at the beginning and the end. See, I told you this is not going to be what I meant. Got it. Okay. Is it gone? I did that, didn't I? I didn't want to do this because I'd run out of time doing this kind of thing. I got it finally. Okay. The beginning and the end. The Spirit of God dwells in you in the blue, and the Spirit of God dwells in you down here at the bottom. So I have that as the beginning and the end. All right. And then I'm going to go from there. All right. The section is shaped theologically at beginning and end. The Spirit of God dwells in you. The middle section is shaped Christologically. That's the part in the green. Okay? It is the Spirit of Christ, and Christ is or dwells in. Right? Note that Paul is talking about the individual in the community. He says anyone, and he says this one. Okay? Actually, I had to change back where it says your body is dead. We get the translators go into little groupies there, and they put your bodies. Your spirit is alive. The translators put your spirits, right? And you need to check your Greek, because he's gone from looking big to looking small, and he'll go back to looking big again, right? So, all right. All right, anyone? And note how the translators, yeah, okay. I've corrected that, okay. What is going on? The Spirit of God dwells in you. So how is it shaped? How is it transforming you? In through the Spirit of Christ. Christ in you, in me, is the Spirit in you, or in me, a Jesus-shaped, enlivening power. We seem to have come around full circle to Galatians 2:20 again. Christ lives in me, now with the specificity of by or through the Spirit. However you want to configure this further is okay. That is the closeness between God, Christ, and Spirit. What I want to note at this point is that to think about the self, the person, the individual in Paul, is to think in the strong context of the Spirit, God's enlivening power shaped by Jesus. Can you advance it? Thanks. Okay. All right, I gave up on all the color stuff, so this is going to get better, I promise. All right, here's a text cluster to broaden things out a bit. 1 Corinthians 8:1b, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Problem. Antidote. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things, 1 Corinthians 9:25a. 1 Corinthians 10:23b, all things are permissible, but not all things build up. Application, and then a summary. 11:1, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. As you can see, this cluster comes from 1 Corinthians 8 through 10, now concerning meat offered to idols. Problem, chapter 8. How does one eat meat offered to idols properly, if at all? Antidote to the problem, chapter 9. Based on following Paul's own example, each person has rights or freedoms, but rights must be exercised with self-control, some kind of intention and discernment. Application, chapter 10. You can eat meat offered to idols, but you must exercise self-control with discernment to meet changing circumstances. And that discernment is based on building up or love. So love builds up, and don't do things that don't build up, right? So the Pauline ethic, so to speak, as I incorporated it in my book, Liberating Words, is this: freedom constrained by love. Now, a lot of water has gone under the bridge till the present. So now, an adjustment to the Pauline ethic. Freedom mediated by love. Can you advance? So we have three terms: freedom, self-control, and love. And my first attempt at the Pauline ethic was freedom constrained by love. And now my new attempt is going to be freedom mediated by love. So you can see the elements: freedom coming down and love coming down on the sides. So self-control is the one that is of our interest in the middle. So the challenge is how we see the function of self-control. Oftentimes we see self-control as only protective, a stay-away, constrained type of discernment. And boy, that fits a lot of what's going on in the Corinthian community, if you know the problems that are at work in there, the need for that constraint. And sure, it probably seems right in this present world gone wrong. But in a new world coming into being, Paul sees the robust self as more. Yes, in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul voluntarily gives up rights for the sake of love. But Paul also advances new rights, new avenues on behalf of the gospel, service, and love. So he says in his adaptability, as a Jew with qualifications, as one under the law with qualifications, as one outside the law, and boy, he took a lot of grief for that one, okay, he has these opportunities. So freedom is Paul's strength. Freedom is the gospel's strength given to him. I didn't look closely enough at that. You see, self-control covers all things. Yes, self-control is protective since we still live in between the times. The old time still presses inwardly and externally with sin and temptation, exclusion, and many death-dealing ways. But the new time breaks in for those early believers and for us with new freedom that opens up new and inclusive vistas. All peoples eat together. Exclusion gives way to inclusion. A slave is given agency and kinship ties. A woman responds to a call to ministry, and more. Freedom, self-control, and love mediate both protection and opportunity. Paul's new world is constructed like that, and he talks and he communicates like that. 2 Corinthians 5:14, the love of Christ controls us. Nice translation. Kind of leaves us in the same place as my use of the word media. What are you going to fill it up with? Does suneko mean to hold in place or to control with some sort of boundaries? That's one possibility. Or does it mean to compel in the sense of impel forward? That's a second possibility, right? Or is it both? Just like I'm trying to argue here for self-control. Check out Philippians 2:16. Hold fast the word of Christ. Or I'll quote it right. Hold fast the word of life. Or is it hold forth the word of life? Or is it both? Paul has a robust sense of self with agency and focus and discernment around love. Okay, one last text. I don't think that's working, so I'm just going to go for it. Okay, all right. Okay, one last text, and then we can get on with it. I'm thinking conclusion. You're probably thinking free lunch at this point. All right, here we go. Again, everyone's favorite memory verse. We even used it as a table grace when my kids were young. Right? Galatians 5:22 through 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. Since this is a New Testament lecture, we need to do the exegesis thing. Contextual exegesis. Start wide and narrow down, in this case, to maybe a singular word. That could be fun. At this point, everybody's looking for a little fun, I'm sure. All right, so here we go, 4 moves. The first is Paul represents the gospel from grace forward. These Corinthians have almost forgotten about the gospel of grace and have switched it for another one, so he needs to work from that place forward. Second move, we find ourselves now in Galatians 5, and in Galatians 5 we find a key maxim that Paul has for what is it that's most truly important about the faith that we hold. What is it that's most truly important? So I'm going to paraphrase that maxim, if that's okay. The most important thing is faith working itself out in, oh, you guys are good, according to the Spirit. All right, that's my paraphrase. So, yeah, that's good. We'll try it again. I'll go all the way up to love, and you go love according to the Spirit. Add that part on if you would, okay? All right, so here it is. The most important thing is faith working itself out.
Love according to the Spirit.
Yeah, excellent. All right, now you got something that, if nothing else, you can take that home, and hopefully it sticks in your mind, and yeah, we got that part down. All right, also in Galatians chapter 5, this is where we see a whole lot of words about freedom and spirit, okay, and love come together. So things are working out now as Paul is moving in on his argument. And then, like a good moralist, Paul, as it were, structures up 2 lists. So the first list is a vice list, and that's all the kind of internal evil kinds of intentions one has and the external evil acts that people do that create what? Bad, right? Okay. Think Romans 1 again, right? That's what he's got here. And so he's going to take that list and he's going to put another list right beside it. And that's what we have in our text right here, a virtue list. Okay? So our 4th move then would be to say, what about this list? What about this list? The enlivening power of God, using a good agricultural metaphor for growth and sustenance, produces fruit. And then we have the list. So, what do you note about the list? Okay, I'm switching modes here a little bit because I thought that would be fun, and this is my last lecture, and I thought, might as well go out the same way I started. What do you notice about the last list, about that list? It starts with Paul always seems to come some way towards love, doesn't he? Think Augustine here, right? It all comes down to love, right? Okay, yeah, he's with that. All right, good. All right, this is, you guys are a good crowd. I take what I can get at this point. All right. All right. So with the list, do we have asyndeton or polysyndeton? That is to say, with the items of the list, do we have no connectors or do we have a multiple number of connectors? Just like normal class. Nobody wants to, all the people in my class right now, I'm looking at them, they're like, we don't like to answer questions because you'll ask me another one. Okay, I get it. All right. Yes, we find that we have no connectors in between on the list, right? All right, there are no and this. It's not like love and joy and peace. Okay, right? Okay. So what do we make of that? Paul's intent here is not that we would stop and kind of fix on each one and reflect for a second before we moved on to the next one. He just kind of gets going. Did you pick it up in my reading? Maybe not. I try really hard. I'll do it again. All right? So the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Yeah? Okay. Got it that time. All right. All right, what kind of observations can we make from the list when we think about rhetoric, for instance? Or even maybe about what we know about a good Greek sentence. Can I do the rhetoric? Yeah. I love rhetoric. I appreciate that. Okay. I was going to do it anyway, even if you didn't give me permission. So, all right. Rhetoric, right? Okay. Let's see. Here we go. Start with the strongest argument first. And then make sure you end strong, right? So all of you that are writing papers in the next couple of weeks, I know you're already thinking about that. Okay, yeah, okay, that's good to know. All right, okay, that's good. All right, your turn. What do we notice from like a Greek sentence? Where is the emphasis in a Greek sentence?
Emphasis in a Greek list will be on the first word and the last word.
Yes, in a sentence? In a Greek sentence?
So.
Same way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so great analogy. Ellie Beth, A for the day. Right, okay. All right. Yeah. So by the analogy, then, right, in a list, we concentrate on the first and last, and I've already bolded it for you. So what do we have here? We've already said there's a relationship between self-control and love, right? Okay. And in this particular list, we see that it is the internal components here which are enhanced by the process of love and self-control. All right, so let's see where I am here. All right, we've already seen how self-control mediates how love is to get done. Of course, self-control needs to be there, to be emphasized, but it can't be in first position as if it pertained to the improper self-mastery of the times. All right, I can put things simply, I suppose. Self-control means controlling yourself in line with God's purposes. Do good and actively resist evil. I read that somewhere. I like that. I have majored in the first half, do good, in this lecture. And the relationship of the good, singular, and love is another important lecture to be had. Romans chapter 2, or Philemon, actually. Philemon, you can do it yourself. Pay attention in Philemon or get an NTIer, and they'll explain it to you. All right, actively resisting evil in Paul is another lecture, also intertwined with love and freedom. It wanted to jump out in this lecture here and there, but alas, there wasn't time. Okay. All right, is there a challenge for us in all of what I've drug you through in this particular lecture here? Let's see what we can come up with. All right, by way of summary. In this lecture, I did not try to dissect all the words or descriptions that Paul used in conjunction with the person, his composite anthropology, so to speak. While coherent enough, Paul is not always consistent in his usage of soma, body, nous, mind, cardia, heart, pneuma, human spirit, not to mention what he does with sarx, flesh, as something neutral, or that part of a human being open to outside forces such as sin and its close companions of frailty and death. I have tried to keep the discussion at the much more manageable level of a person's interiority and agency to think, to discern, and to act. In this lecture, I did not explore some of the other metaphors that Paul applies to the function of the person or the self. Growth, for instance, was hinted at in the agricultural metaphor in the fruit of the Spirit passage. Probably the most interesting, daring, and important omission would be slavery, which, if we had time, could be described as a conceptual framework for Paul's anthropology. With respect to agency, every human being is guided by some power outside of him or herself. In this lecture, I did not explore the self from a variety of other important perspectives. Self-boasting, selfishness, self-testing, also very important teaching and reminding points from Paul applicable to our attempts to have good community life. Now, by contrast, in this lecture, I did try to start where Paul starts everything, with God's gospel of power. I have tried to articulate the robust self. For Paul, the self is reoriented, redeemed, working together with the enlivening power of God, the Spirit, to exercise the self to mediate love. This self is valuable. This self is resourced. This self is responsible. This self is relational. This self can act appropriately to God's will. This is new creation. In this lecture, we have tried to think not only in a theological context, God's gospel of power, God's fresh and powerful movement of grace, but even more specifically, pneumatologically. That is, studying God's enlivening power. The Spirit is in Jesus, shaped by Jesus, and is in us. Christologically, we see Jesus who voluntarily and with full agency gave of himself out of love for release, freedom, and power, both in his life and in his death. Paul follows in relationship and in imitation by voluntarily giving up his rights, his freedom for love's sake, and by exercising freedom for new opportunities and new avenues. Both these actions, voluntarily giving up and exercising new freedom, are subsumed under self-control as spirit mastery. And the outcome is self-giving love. Jesus led the way, Paul followed, and now Paul invites us to follow as well. Imitate me as I imitate Christ. Here is a challenge for me as someone who, as professor and dean, has sat with theological students and others to consider the hard discernment and direction of self-identity for 32 years. Paul's robust self may challenge us to think about how we communicate and speak of this redeemed self. All selves, every person has agency. Taking away agency is bad because God doesn't do it. God doesn't model that for us. And the operative questions are, how is our agency constructed and shaped? I've made that my topic today. How should we use our agency responsibly? I've touched on that as well. How should we protect our agency and our freedom? That's another lecture. Where we stand as Christians, the self should not be diminished. We don't need less self, moving the self out of the way, sacrifice of the self, denying the self. Google that one and see the vigorous conversation on both sides. You might start with the C.S. Lewis Institute. I propose that we need self-giving not as a loss, but as an extension of our spirit, Jesus enlivened self towards others. Let me repeat that. I propose that we need self-giving not as a loss, but as an extension of our spirit, Jesus enlivened self towards others. Perspective matters. For me, the term self-giving seems most effective and motivating, and I urge you to try it. And I'm deeply gratified, Phil, for the note from the student who learned that along the way and stole all my thunder in this whole lecture. Whoa! That was a thought going through my mind when I heard that, but I am deeply touched by that, though. Apparently, it is true. Okay. All right, I got a little yeah, okay. Do you know the expression, quit while you're ahead? Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to do that because it's my last lecture. Okay. Here we go. I'm close to finish, so yeah, that's a good thing. All right, finally, I want to take issue with the use of some of our self-language, particularly when we use it to direct, influence, or maybe restrict others. I'm not trying to point out some large-scale problem here. I think of it as maybe sometimes more of a subtle problem or an issue. Here's what I mean. Sometimes we turn the self-language away from our own interiority and self-definition, and we project it out to or against another. In very specific contexts, we tell someone to deny yourself, be selfless, sacrifice yourself. That is not the kind of self you can be. And if that doesn't land, then we try bringing out the big guns. You are selfish, full of yourself, not a team player. There is not room for you here. Ouch. Now, is the agenda still focused on the self in front of me or you, myself or yourself? Or has it shifted to protective language, control language, maintenance language, or fear language that tries to uphold the status quo for groups, communities, or institutions? And to whose advantage? Such outwardly focused uses of self-language with such types of negative comportment don't seem to fit into the powerful, ever-expanding, inclusive movement of God in Jesus Christ and the ongoing promptings of the Spirit for inclusion and gifting. In questions of call, ministry discernment, identity formation, gender, cross-cultural hospitality, lifestyle issues, advocacy, forgiveness, mercy, and more, might we not struggle with more robust vigor to a place of win-win? Might we not struggle with more robust vigor to find a place of all individuals finding a place in our community? I'm just saying, sometimes we need to check our speech acts. How am I really using words, and to what effect? And to whose advantage? Self-giving love is a good way to express who we are and what is required of us. Self-giving love is a good way to express who we are and what is required of us. And the robust self in Paul is not alone. At times I may lose my bearings. I can do it all by myself, for myself. Nope, that's not right. I can't do it. I'm not capable of that. Nope, that's not right. Our generous and merciful God, who never abandons us, who never lets us go, keeps on saying again and again, let's do it together. Thank you for your kind attention and your presence here today.